So on January the 29th this year, 2025, there was a terrible plane crash in Washington, D.C. A Bombardier CRJ 700 that was being operated by American Airlines as Flight 5342 collided with a Sikorsky Black Hawk helicopter H-60 over the Washington, D.C. But thankfully for the local citizens over the Potomac, the wreckage crashed into the river, and as of now, it's pretty obvious that nobody survived. 64 passengers and crew on the American Airlines Flight 3 and the helicopter have died. At the moment, it's just a matter of recovering bodies. Now, as with all these things, as soon as it happened, suddenly social media, especially Twitter, was flooded with this revelation that so many people on Twitter were aviation experts, and people just seemed to come out of the woodwork as if from nowhere, displaying the secret knowledge they had about aerodynamics, about flight mechanics, basic physics, of flight, of air traffic control procedures, military procedures, all that sort of thing. All these people just seem to know exactly what happened, what went wrong, and why it went wrong, and who was to blame. Initially, there was suggestion that the helicopter was actually flying too high, slightly, not massively too high, but above a permitted level. Although it's also clear that the air traffic control did give the pilot the information about the plane, and the pilot saw the plane. So how they crashed, who knows? If you're like me and you watch the National Geographic show Air Crash Investigation, which I think is just called Mayday, in America, you'll know that over the decades, these accidents have, they've been repeated accidents like this, and a lot of the time, despite the faults of the aviation industry, there's been a great way to push for safety and to introduce new technologies and new procedures throughout the whole process, to ensure these things don't happen. There was a crash in, I think, 1986, where a training flight, like a Cessna, crashed with a passenger plane over San Diego, I believe, and this led to some major changes in how aircraft are separated, and even some technology was all this. And quite rightly, people think, well, how did this happen? Even though it was at night, how did this helicopter just fly straight into a plane, or the plane flew straight into the helicopter? Could be either way around, really. And as I say, the aviation experts just popped up out of nowhere, just like all the vaccine and virology experts popped up during COVID, 5 years ago during COVID. Suddenly everyone knew how this stuff worked, despite not displaying any sign of having any qualifications or experience in the industry before. But one thing that did also rear its ugly head very soon was DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Trump suddenly came out and decided that, probably say that it's seen that DEI hiring policies were at least partly to blame for this. So what he's referring to is a number of different things that the Federal Aviation Authority have been involved in terms of trying to change the sort of makeup of their employees, their staff. Back in 2016, 59%, according to the BBC, the BBC Verify article, 59% of the FAA's workforce in total were white men, and since then that's gone down a little bit to 55%. In the same time, the number of disabled employees has gone from 0.7% to 2%, and that's the Federal Aviation Authority in total. That's not specifically air traffic control. According to the article, the FAA employs 45,000 people, and air traffic control makes up 14,000 of them. So Trump, Trump, and the Republican Party, and anyone who just wants to have their say, has immediately latched onto this DEI push to change, I say, to change the sort of the demographics of the FAA, and that how somehow that means that there are definitely unqualified people being employed. Um, so, so the question is that fair? Is that really fair? Well, the thing about air traffic control is that it's a very specialist job. It requires a massive amount of training. And I say over the years where air traffic control have made big mistakes, either because they weren't trained properly, or they had sometimes it's been down to some personal issues for by air traffic controller, various different ways of training and weeding and monitoring air traffic controllers have been developed. I don't know the specifics, but it's not just a case of being taught how to look at a radar and recognize when a plane's flying in one direction or another, and telling them where to go and how to identify a runway. It's actually a very, obviously it's a life critical role. That back one of the issues that critics have had is that back in 2011, during the Obama administration, the FAA introduced some new hiring practices, which involved a questionnaire about certain biographical details about the applicants. The idea is to get more, try and encourage more um, applicants from different backgrounds that not necessarily usually going for those jobs. This was actually eventually withdrawn in 2018 for air traffic controllers and for the FAA for the whole FAA in 2024 last year. There was a lawsuit about it because apparently there was some of these certain questions were given higher scores for certain answers, which could have been discriminatory, which is wrong. There shouldn't be that any sort of discrimination in the role. The hiring practice should be fair. But then again, there was also in 2019, during Trump's administration, he put in a new hiring process to try and encourage more employment in the FAA for people with disabilities. And they say for 2020 to 2024, the number of people with disabilities that work at FAA doubled from 1% to 2%. So it was actually quite a successful policy implemented on the face of it anyway. But is it really fair for DEI to be blamed for this? Well, obviously not, because we just don't know. That's the main thing. Nobody knows exactly what happened. Why did these two plane crashes? There was a rumor that went around that a trans woman was a pilot in a helicopter, and this photograph was sent around, and then this the woman who actually was the photo, she had to put a video. A, to let everyone know that she was still alive. B, that she had nothing to do with the helicopter, and C, she wasn't even trans. And then of course when the actual, I believe it was the pilot or one of the, I think it was the actual the reported to be the pilot, this woman, a qualified military pilot, but who for the last few years has been working as an aide in the Biden White House. And people saying, what was she doing flying this helicopter? She was an aide in the Biden White House, as if somehow working in the White House suddenly means you're not qualified to fly a helicopter, even if you've gone through all the training and you have the licensing and you still have the hours. There were some people talking about, there's some people saying that the number of hours she'd flown was actually made public. And people saying, well, that's not a lot, but it was still a few hundred hours of flying. So she was, at the very least, she seemed to have been a capable helicopter pilot. I don't know, and that's the thing. Nobody knows, but people just want to throw out DEI. Oh, DEI is just giving us terrible people, and then it's lowering the standards. Blah blah blah. Now, when it comes to DEI, I have a history of being very critical of it at times. Certainly in the past. With one of my previous companies I worked for, that company was one of the pioneers of corporate diversity, and we used to have all the training courses every year. Sometimes we'd actually have an annual session that lasted for a morning, if I remember rightly. And anyone who remembers me from that time will know that I could be in a bit of a, I won't use any bad language, but certainly self-deprecating, pejorative term to describe myself. I sometimes went way too far in my criticism, sometimes, aggressively so. But this was, but I mean, there are still valid reasons to worry about. Is DEI being implemented correctly? What's it for? What are the outcomes you're looking for? Are you looking to just to make sure that there is a broad spectrum of people who are being considered for roles, who are applying for the roles? You're making sure that people, in terms of promotions, the programs are fair, and they're actually going to the right people, or are you just trying to massively just change the makeup of the staff of employees just to look good? I mean, classic examples would be with IT, when some companies say we want to have 50% of our programmers, software engineers, as women. Well, that's not the profile of people coming out of schools and university with software, basic, even just basic programming skills. It is mostly men. So how do you get to that? That seems to be unachievable and very unreasonable, and possibly would. I'm not saying that women can't be programmers, but certainly if women are not going for those courses, either degrees, or in the UK we have A levels. If they're not going for that, if they're not trained for that, then there is a worry, a legitimate worry that you are lowering standards. But if the DEI policies are actually trying to make sure, well, so let's say I don't know what it is, so that 20% of all software development graduates are women, but our company's only got a 10% profile, not of programmers as women. Excuse me. Then yeah, absolutely. Then that does seem to be that there's an issue, and a DEI policy would actually be very fair. Certainly, I've changed my mind a lot. I'm not completely on the side of some of the more aggressive DEI policies, but certainly trying to make sure that there are rules and procedures in place that ensure that people aren't being discriminated is absolutely 100% fair. Even if you don't like DEI as a term or as a concept, just make sure that there's no discrimination. It's absolutely 100% justified. So when Trump comes out and immediately starts talking about DEI is responsible, well, what's the evidence for it? And if that is true, then isn't he partly responsible for that because of the big DEI recruitment policy he brought in for people with disabilities? Surely that means he's kind of responsible for it, if that's what he believes. If he's saying he's not responsible, then why is it DEI? Obviously, he's probably more trying to pin this on Obama, because there's a much bigger push way back, so as I say, in 2011. Personally, I don't think he really believes it. I think it's just his shtick now. He needs to keep his base supportive, and if it looks like he's really tackling these controversial issues, then that's going to keep his supporters happy. That's going to keep people that he wants on his side. I don't think he really cares, and if in my assumption anyway, he will inevitably be proved wrong. That had nothing to do with DEI. It was actually human error, possibly by. I don't want to speculate about the sort of the identity of the air traffic controller or anyone else who was involved, but certainly I think there won't be, if he is proven wrong, it won't really matter, because what matters to him and to his supporters is that he's saying those things, and he's going after that sort of thing without fear, because he's so brave to go after DEI policies. Between that's what it looks like more. It's just belligerence. It's just him looking like he's being the big man, looks like he's saying the unpopular things. He's going against the grain. He's going against the deep state. He's going against the narrative. He's going against woke, which obviously is now a term that's being completely. It's now kind of a meaningless term these days, and it is sick, actually, because this is for me. But this is one of, as someone who loves traveling and I do fly a few times a year. This is something I always have in the back of my head, especially as I watch some of the episodes of Air Crash Investigation. It this sort of thing, this thing bothers me because he's using the deaths of all those people, the horrible, just violent, grotesque death of these people, to make himself look like the big man. It should be called out. And don't get me wrong, I've been sympathetic towards Trump, especially in his first term, but there is a line, and this is one, and obviously some of you will say, oh well, that line was crossed the moment he first started speaking up in his first debate or whatever. Fine, I'm not gonna defend myself, say I'm right except for this point. The fact is that he is, to me, interesting, just from basic human decency, he's crossed the line. He should not have gone down there. He should have kept his mouth shut. Just because he's president doesn't mean he can just speculate about things that happen. It doesn't mean that he has any special secret knowledge, and all that his supposed to always come to his aid. This is bad behaviour, which I think is there just to make himself look like the strutting hero who's fighting against the narrative, as it were, and that he's keeping his supporters in line. It feels almost like it's a weird kind of electioneering, which he doesn't really need because he's already in power. But yeah, so I think I would just love if Trump's going to keep going, then I just really wish that people on Twitter would just shut up about what they think happened. We know what happened. 2 planes collided. That's all we know. 2 planes collided. 67 people died a horrid death, and those families are going to be grieving. And all we have is President Trump trying to look like the big man, and it's sick, and it needs to stop. And so does everyone else on X. They need to stop too. I know it's not going to change anything, but I really wish there would be silence just for a little while the air crash investigation, I've forgotten what they're called, get on with their jobs without having to worry about what the president's going to say and whether they're going to be publicly criticised if they come up with a cause that has nothing to do with DEI. They need to be able to get on with the job without feeling any kind of pressure. And Trump is 100% wrong to be even making any claims of any kind.